All right, so again, in the last hour, we wrapped up talking about the season of sacrifice. Now we're going to begin, and this will be ongoing over many weeks, into looking into the tradition of Freemasonry and what it really, truly is. Because there's a lot of confusion about what Freemasonry is, and a lot of people continue to make the mistake of thinking that it is about only one thing, and not understanding that there is a dual side to Freemasonry, that there is a positive aspect of this tradition, and then there is a corruption or a perversion of it, as dark occultists always do. And in fact, that's all they can ever do. Dark occultists, as I've been trying to hammer into people to get them to understand, do not create, okay? They do not invent new things. They take things that are already there and use them to their benefit, to their selfish, egoic benefit. So they don't create anything, all right? The mystery traditions were already in existence before the dark occult came and took them over, all right? The dark occult perverts. It perverts. It uses something that's already there to its selfish aims and ends. That's all it does. So, in its original unadulterated form, okay, what Freemasonry is ultimately about, and this is my basic definition for it, okay, is a tradition in which natural law, which we've talked about extensively on this show, and which I've done a whole presentation on, and I believe that was show number 36, if people want to go back and look into my breakdown of natural law. Freemasonry is a tradition in which natural law and morality is taught through a system of symbols, allegories, and rituals. That is what Freemasonry is in its unadulterated form. Okay? Now, in the modern day, is it effectively doing that? I would say it is not. Has it fallen? Okay? Largely. Maybe not entirely, but has it fallen from its original intent? Absolutely. Has it become something that is essentially something completely other than what it was originally intended to be and do? I believe that it has. And that's a deplorable state. It's a deplorable condition, but that happens to be what is. Okay? So what I'm going to endeavor to teach here over the next several weeks is what this tradition really is about, and then illustrate this through the symbolism of Freemasonry, or what is known as the craft. Okay? So I want to direct people up to my website for the imagery that goes along with the concepts that I'll be breaking down. You go to whatonearthishappening.com, whatonearthishappening.com, click on the radio listen page, which is the button on the image on the upper left-hand side of the website. It says listen live, okay? You click that, it'll take you to the player page, and underneath the player plugin, you will see listed there images for tonight's show, March 22nd. And there will be two sections, Season of Sacrifice and Freemasonry. We'll be beginning in this segment with the Freemasonry imagery, okay? So before we do that, I want to make another definition very clear to people, and that is what Freemasonry ultimately is a system that teaches through something known as allegory, okay? This is basic associative thinking, all right? What an allegory is a story or a picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning. Okay, there's that word, hidden. Occult means hidden. This is indeed an occult tradition. It is veiling its teachings, and it's veiling them for a number of reasons. We talked about why occultism veils what it, conceals its teachings in the past. It does it for two reasons. In its dark form of occultism, it veils it because it's trying to keep that knowledge from people that it wants to wield influence over and use that knowledge as a weapon. In its positive influence, occultism may have veiled its teachings because it is too dangerous, physically dangerous, for it to teach these teachings in the open. And it may also and I believe erroneously, worry that this knowledge will be taken by people in a very egoic state and used as a weapon. So therefore, it veils it and attempts to keep it from the hands of what it considers profane people. Now, I think that both of these are in error. Both of these stances are in error. And I've said multiple times on this show, and will continue to repeat the phrase, that humanity will never be free until the occult is no longer the occult. Meaning, until this knowledge is taken out of its veiled form, put out into the light of day, and it becomes common sense, human beings are going to be continuously enslaved, because this is knowledge that people need to know about themselves. And it's a procedure of studying the self. That's ultimately what it's about, and ultimately it's a science for understanding how suffering is created through going against natural law principles. And it's a science for getting back into harmony with those natural law principles by understanding the self, and then changing one's behavior in accordance with that truth. Okay? So, an allegory, which is what Freemasonry ultimately is a story or a picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden or occulted meaning, typically a moral or a political one. That's what an allegory actually is. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back on the What on Earth is Happening segment of the Intel Hub radio show. I'm your host, Mark Passio. On my website, whatonearthishappening.com, on the radio listen page, in the section of images entitled Freemasonry, we're going to begin with image number 1 there. And that is a large image showing the basic structure of Freemasonry. Now, this shows 2 different rites of Freemasonry, the Scottish Rite and the York Rite. Okay, the Scottish Rite has 32 degrees or steps there depicted symbolically on this pyramidal structure that you see here in this image. Okay, they're known as degrees that are conferred to the initiates of this tradition, and it ends in the honorary 33rd degree. On the right-hand side of the image, we see the York Rite, okay, which has 10 degrees, ending in the Knights Templar degree, which is at that same level as the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite. Now, you'll see that this entire structure here is built upon these first 3 steps at the bottom, the 3 degrees, which are the first, second, and third initiatory degrees of Freemasonry. The first degree is known as the Entered Apprentice, the second degree as the Fellowcraft, and the third degree as the Master Mason. These first 3 initiatory degrees comprise what is known as the Blue Lodge. The degrees from degree 4 to 32 in the Scottish Rite comprise what is known as the Red Lodge. And then degrees 33 and on comprise what is referred to as the White Lodge. And I would add that those illuminated degrees or higher level degrees above the 32nd degree of the Red Lodge would not only be the White Lodge degrees, but also the Black Lodge degrees. Okay? So at that level, you have positive higher level initiates or illuminated Masons, and also negative or dark Masons. And I would say that that is reflected throughout this entire structure. Okay? One of the things I want to point out is the similarity of this hierarchical system with the hierarchical structure of control that we've talked about previously on this radio show. Any control-based institution, no matter which one you look at, it could be the military, the police, government, the education system, the media, you name it. Okay? Any corporation in general is structured in 2 basic ways. The first is hierarchy. This means it contains a system or a chain of command, okay, a system of degrees of some sort, as does Freemasonry, at least in the official lodge form of Freemasonry. Now, the official lodge form of Freemasonry is essentially not what I'm going to really be initiating people into as part of this show. I am going to be taking them into the original core teachings of what this tradition was about, and this dates back far beyond where the lodge system came into existence. Okay? Freemasonry is an ancient tradition. It is one of the mystery traditions of consciousness that dates right back into the ancient world. Okay? This goes back thousands of years, not just hundreds. Okay? And one of the principal places that it originates is Egypt. And Egypt then was not known as Egypt. It was called Kemet, K-M-T. Okay? And this means black, with a black land. Okay? It's a place of mysteries. It's the place where people were initiated into the mysteries, the mystery traditions of consciousness. And Freemasonry is one of these traditions. Now, it was likely not called Freemasonry there, but it was associated with building. And Freemasonry is, of course, associated with building. And here you see this pyramid structure, which I'm referring to, just like the pyramids of Egypt are built in this configuration, okay, with a broad base containing, a whole lot of substance and material until you get up to the apex, which tapers off, okay? So you have a lot of low-level initiates, and then as, you go higher up into the knowledge, there's less and less people holding it. So this is hierarchy, okay? The second factor of any system of control or any system that is based in this pyramid structure is compartmentalization. We talked about that being how in this system of hierarchy, the people who do know the agenda at the top will often be will often keep the total knowledge of that agenda from the lower level initiates. And indeed, this is what is happening in the lodge system of today, because Freemasonry has been steered in quite a different direction from its original roots and intents, and it is being used as a system of control. For me to deny that would be lying. I mean, let's be honest about it. However, it becomes all too easy, because we do recognize that, to think that the entire tradition should be thrown out. The idea of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Okay? We need to understand what the original teachings of this tradition are about, so that we understand it is simply something that has become perverted over time, just like every other religion has. We talked about what the esoteric core teachings of religions are versus what they have come down to us as in the modern world, which are essentially systems of mind control. Is Freemasonry any different? Not really. Okay? So to get to the original traditions, we have to understand it's older than we're being told. It does date to the ancient mystery traditions, and that goes back to Egypt, or Kemet, okay, the black land, okay. This is the root of the word alchemy, okay. The Kemetians, the Egyptian people who studied the mystery traditions, not all of them, but the initiates into these traditions and keepers of this knowledge, they considered themselves shining beacons of light, teachers who were keeping a tradition from time immemorial of how natural law worked and how important truly understanding natural law and living in harmony with it as a moral being was to maintaining order in the world. Okay? So they looked at themselves as beacons of light who were way showers, okay, in a world essentially that needed to receive these teachings, that needed to receive the light, that was basically falling from its understanding of natural law and falling deeper and deeper into ego and worldly identification, as we've talked about extensively on this show. Okay, the barriers to true self-realization. okay, worldly identification, 5 sense identification, and ego identification, all right? Things that prevent us from really understanding who and what we truly are and what this is all about, what we're here to actually do. So the teachings of Chem, okay, were really, these mystery traditions were encoded into a system of symbols and allegorical lessons, all right, stories, parables, etc., that convey a lesson about what's really going on in the world around us. This is the most done in the modern day through movies. Movies teach through allegory. There's many allegorical movies. As a matter of fact, most movies are allegorical, that are basically teaching some sort of a lesson and aren't just for entertainment value. And this can also be done for the negative. It can be, predictive programming and a form of mind control and, basically steering one's perceptions in a certain direction through movies as well. But allegorical movies are basically movies about the real world, but they're told in a fictional story to get people to relate the story to what's really going on around them. Things like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, The Matrix, They Live. I mean, you can name a million of them. You can go on and on. These are allegorical movies, okay? Freemasonry is an allegory as well. It's done largely through its symbols and its rituals. These are what the allegories in Freemasonry are about. To understand allegory, however, requires the right brain to be activated because it is about associative thinking. It is not just pure logical left brain thinking. That is the compasses and square with the G in the middle of them. I'm sure just about everyone has seen this at some point or another. And I'd like to basically explain what this symbol represents and break down all of the components of it. So, in the configuration with its point at the bottom, this is now image number 2, if you're following along on the website, the compasses and square with the G. And there's a couple of stylized interpretations of them. Image number 2 and 3 shows this symbol, okay? The square in this configuration represents base consciousness, okay? It represents essentially a low state of awareness or a low state of understanding, not being able to see large-scale patterns because one is in a state of imbalance, okay? You could not possibly balance a square like that. It is also rigid. It is unyielding. It is difficult to teach, okay, or to become supple or bending, okay, to receive new information. A 90-degree angle like that is not essentially found in nature, so it has gone away from its true nature, okay? The square as a shape traditionally is used to represent earth-bound awareness, earthly identification, meaning materialism, okay? Meaning ego-based thinking, okay? Selfishness, not care for others, all right? Worldly identification and awareness. In other words, being trapped in the base part of the consciousness and brain. We talked about how the brain has so much to do with our level of consciousness and what our behavior eventually manifests like, okay? We talked about the components of the brain. Well, this part of this symbol would be analogous to the R complex of the brain, okay, in this configuration, in this with its point down like that, okay? It's representing the state where you are ruled by base consciousness. You don't have rulership over yourself, essentially. All right? You are so stuck in material worldview and base consciousness that essentially you're ruled by your instinct and ruled by the passions. Okay? That's what the square in general represents. And since it traces this imperfected shape, okay, that in traditional symbolism has been used to represent the lower world, okay, or the material plane only, divorced from spirit, essentially. That's what the square at the bottom, okay, at the low point of this symbol represents. The compasses, on the other hand, which you'll see depicted as being placed over the square, okay, represent coming upward in consciousness to a place of balance, all right, to a place of higher understanding, moving off of the square as a shape symbolically. Now the compasses trace a circle. The circle, traditionally in symbolism, is used to represent the divine or the higher world. It's used to represent cosmic consciousness. It's used to represent the break with the identification of the material and the incorporation of spirit, of spiritual understanding. Okay? So the compasses trace what is considered the divine shape, the circle, the perfected shape. The circle has no beginning and no end. It has no rough edges. It is the perfect shape. It is based on a number that cannot be essentially defined with accuracy, pi. Okay? It's a divine proportion. Okay? The circle is the shape used essentially to represent perfection and the divine and higher consciousness. The compasses are a symbolic analog to those concepts. Okay? And the word, there's word play involved here as well. Compasses form the basis of the word compassion. Okay? These are flexible. Okay? They bend. Okay? They're not rigid. This implies teachability. This implies going along with the flow of creation as opposed to attempting to buck that flow. Okay? As opposed to going against that natural law. All right? The compasses represent having attained higher spiritual awareness through that G in the middle, okay, which is the all-important part of this symbolism. Now, the G has stood for many things, okay, but it's the way that we need to go through to get out of that base material identification represented by the square and to a place of higher spiritual awareness and compassion. Okay? So, the G, people will say it stands for geometry, and that is one of the things that it stands for. Okay? These are shapes. These are geometers' tools. These are drawing tools. Okay? However, it means so much more than that. And I'm going to give a quick list, and we'll probably end there tonight, of some of the things that the G does represent. And I want to get to the main thing that it represents, hopefully. If not, we'll do that next week. Okay? The G has stood for geometry, the grand or great architect of the universe, G-A-O-T-U, which is essentially another way of saying God. But essentially, in Freemasonry, God is looked at as an architect, a creator, one who has put the divine plan into manifestation and has created the physical world. Okay? So it represents God. It also represents goddess because, again, this G in the middle is actually the emotional qualities of the self. Okay? We have to essentially incorporate our emotional makeup to make our emotional makeup much more mature than what it is when we're young, to become emotional adults, to go through that transition from ego-based identification to true compassionate awareness. And that's done through the goddess aspect of ourselves. So that's also what that G represents, the sacred feminine. It also represents gnosis. The way of getting out of suffering is knowledge, experientially derived, or gnosis, okay, the Greek word for knowledge. It represents good, okay, or in other words, harmony with the natural law. It can be used to represent the word green, because that is the frequency of life and love energy, as we've seen in the past, the balance point of the visible spectrum of light. It can also represent gate. A gateway is a transitional point. To go through a gate means to make a transition from one point to another, and ultimately it represents the generative principle. Now, the generative principle is the main key thing to understand about that G in the middle of the compass is in square, but unfortunately, that's all we really have time for this evening. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bob. I'll be here next Tuesday night, Mark, continuing our analysis of Freemasonry. If you want to catch the first hour of the show, check out my website at 8 p.m., and I'll be going into Freemasonry in more depth then.